they were all in one part of the house, and whenever the water came, and they decided they were going to get in the other part because the other part had an attic, and whenever they stepped from the old kitchen or bedroom that was to the east, whenever they walked back to the main part of the house split, and an old aunt and her son-in-law stayed behind.
Hi, this is Charles McNeely from DevDoc Theater, and it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with Mr. Gerald Bonsall. Gerald, you're from, right now, you're from around Homewood?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Homewood, Louisiana, but you grew up in Cameron Parish?
Grand Chenier in Cameron Parish.
Wonderful. So welcome, Gerald. It's so good to have you here. We're documenting the stories of Hurricane Audrey. I guess to begin with, let's start the way I've always started these. How old were you whenever in 1957, that date, June 27th, 1957, how old were you at that time?
17 years old.
17. Before we get to the storm, whenever you were 17, can you tell us a little bit about your family at that time, who was a part of it? And
well, my family was my mother and my daddy, and I had a brother. Well, my mother and dad and my brother were in Houston. I had an aunt living in Houston, and they were visiting them, and they weren't there, but Daddy was.
Okay, Dad was at the house, but your mom and brother were in Houston. Okay, and what are your parents' names?
Claude and Agnes Bonsall.
Thank you. And your brother's name?
Thomas. Well,
Thomas, or you told him Tommy, but Thomas Bonsall. Okay, all right. And so you were there with your dad?
No, sir. I was at Chenier Pardue with some friends. In fact, we had old widows, and they'd all go to one house whenever they had night and sleep. They didn't sleep by themselves. Okay. And they came and asked Uncle Vanya and Aunt Effie if I could go spend the night with them because of the storm. And that's how I ended up at the house that I was. Gotcha. But that's not where I was living,
Okay. Right. You weren't at your parents' house. You were with, what was their name? Uncle Vanya?
I was living with Uncle Vanya, Terrio, and Effie.
Okay. Terrios.
Yes.
Okay.
But I was at the neighbor's house.
Okay.
The old people wanted somebody there because that storm was coming. Yeah. And they didn't want to stay by themselves.
Of course. How many people were in the house?
We were around 25 people, but whenever the storm came.
Yeah, that's what I heard. A lot of houses that I've talked to had between 16 to 30 people in them.
The two houses to the east of us, the old house where I was raised, they had over 50 people. And
in one house.
In one house, and the other house had that many or maybe more. But that house floated in the marsh.
Okay, with the 50 people.
All but two. Okay. The old house was built in two parts. Gotcha. And they were all in one part of the house. And whenever the water came, and they decided they were going to get in the other part because the other part had an attic. Okay. And whenever they stepped from the old kitchen or bedroom that was to the east, whenever they walked back to the main part of the house split, and an old aunt and her son-in-law stayed behind.
In the east part of the house?
East part of the house. No, they stayed on the one that stayed.
Oh, the stayed, okay.
Yeah, the big house floated in the marsh.
Gotcha.
And the old lady had a broken arm, and they stayed there all night there. But see, we were lucky. We were upstairs. We were not in water, but they were down in water.
Gotcha.
And
now, the house wasn't moving that you were in, right?
No, sir. It wasn't moving, but it was shaking.
Now, the house that had detached and it was moving, was there anybody in that one?
Yes, sir. There was about 50 people in it.
Okay.
And the other part that stayed had two.
Okay, I see. Okay. So the one that was moving, How did they fare? How did those people?
They all survived.
Okay. So it just kept floating, and did it ever stop?
Yes, sir. It stopped in the middle of Little Chenier and Chenier Park during the marsh.
Absolutely.
They had a levee to the north side, and I think whenever it hit that levee, it sprung.
Of course.
It made a hole in the.
Right there.
It made a hole in the floor. It just went about 50 feet further, and it set.
There we go. So everybody took a little house ride, and everybody survived that. And then the two people who were in the other part.
They survived.
That's wonderful.
They survived.
Goodness. Okay. So before that happened, okay, what do you remember about preparing? Is there any kind of preparation?
We never seen that before.
Right.
The day before the storm, my uncle, my mama's sister's husband, he was a Rutherford.
Rutherford, yes, oh yes. Absolutely.
He was a Rutherford.
Yes.
And see, that's the land, the Rutherford Beach, that's
his.
That the old people had the property.
Gotcha.
But anyway, they had cattle.
Okay.
And they had them in the sea marsh. They called it across the south side of the highway.
Yes.
Well, they wanted to bring them to the north side.
Okay.
And that was before the road was built. There was nothing on Rutherford Beach.
Yes.
So we were riding side by side next to one another. We couldn't hear each other talk. The Gulf was roaring so hard.
The what was roaring?
The Gulf.
Really?
Yes.
So it was getting close whenever y'all were driving the cattle. Audrey was arriving.
Yeah, it was getting there close.
17 years old. Who was with you driving those cattle?
Oh, we were, my uncle and I don't know, 6 or 7 different people.
So there were a few.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. We were 6.
Did y'all get them to?
We crossed the road, but didn't do no good.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole parish was underwater, and but I know from now on, after that, when a hurricane's coming, they will take them north, like to Quincy and DeRidder and stuff like that. And
now, the morning of the storm, we had Miss Loretta's husband was offshore working, and he came in during the night.
Okay.
And his mother lived on Grand Chenier, so we he wanted to go see about his mother and daddy.
Sure.
And whenever you got to the Mermentau River, they had a road at that time across. We got to the Mermentau River. There was a road along the river that was all underwater. So we turned around and went back.
Yes.
And that was about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So about 10 o'clock, we were all sitting on the front porch of the old house where we were at. They had about a 25-foot wave coming. And that's when it hit I showed you the porch.
The picture.
The porch, and that's when
That's when the porch.
Oh, it went. That's the first thing that went.
Okay.
Then we went up in the attic through that chimney hole.
All
Not
of
chimney hole.
Almost 50 of you went up in the attic, and so really, I mean, y'all tried to cross the Mermentau, but that road was on. So yeah, and a lot of people tried that. They left, and then they had to turn around.
Well, really, if we'd have known what was coming, we could have got out. We had time to get out.
What do you remember about that? Because I know it sped up. It was supposed to get there a day later. What do you remember about that?
Well, the weather people didn't have the information they got today. I mean, it's not their fault.
Right, exactly. I agree. They did what they knew at that time, but it wasn't like we have today.
It wasn't like we have today. I mean, the people that were there living in at that time had never went through anything like that. They had storms earlier. I read an article in the paper that Johnson Bayou, that's the east-western part
the
of
west part of it.
It got wiped out I forgot what year it got wiped out. Well, they had an article in the Cameron Parish. They had an article, I think, here a while back that went through everything. If you can get,
I will look up Cameron Parish.
Ask her to send you that. They had a big article. Well, it was the day of the week of the storm.
Okay. It was an anniversary.
Anniversary, yes, sir.
Absolutely. Okay.
And they had a big article in the paper. You could get a lot of information. You could get a lot of information there.
Okay. Thank you. What happened to your house?
Well, the house, my daddy's house on Grand Chenier floated probably 150, 200 feet off of the blocks.
Okay.
And,
But it stayed together?
well, part of it broke off.
Okay.
He had added a kitchen. We only had a 4-bedroom house at the time.
Okay.
No bathroom.
Gotcha.
So whenever we had electricity, he added a bathroom and a different kitchen, and that different kitchen, that's what broke away from the original.
Was your dad okay?
Oh yeah, they made it okay.
Wonderful. And now, how many people were in the house that you were in?
We were about 25.
25. Okay. And that, did the house move that you were in?
No, sir. It just shook.
Amazing. Okay. So y'all went up into the attic basically and did not move and did not.
Seen a lot of animals, dead animals pass.
Okay.
We seen boats floating by. And to the south of us, they had a house that was on the south side of the Mermentau River that floated. We figured it was going to end up hitting us.
Yes.
Well, it sunk about a half mile from where we were.
Wow.
And it would have been a direct hit.
Yes. I hope nobody was in that house.
No, sir, nobody was in that house.
And so you remember, y'all were in the attic, right? Whenever the porch was taken.
Oh, we weren't in the attic and had the porch left. We were still downstairs.
Downstairs.
Yes,
when
sir.
That took off.
Well, we
y'all
had
went
to,
up.
whenever we seen that wave coming,
Yes, okay.
we had to, that's when we had got up.
Now, y'all got into, you were telling me earlier before we started filming, how did y'all get into the attic? What did you have to go through?
Well, the hole in the ceiling was small, and we had to break that up kind of by hand where we could make it big enough for us to get in, and we got on the kitchen sink and
jumped up in there. Now the hole, it wasn't an attic door. It was the exhaust from a stove or something?
Exhaust from the stove, yes.
So wood, a pipe. It was a pipe.
Wood stove pipe.
Oh my goodness. And so everybody, children as well as adults, they broke away, and so everybody could get up there. And so you had 25 people up in the attic.
And I had a friend my age that was their home. Okay. And he was in the sink pushing people. Yes. And they had some dishes in the sink. We didn't take the dishes out. Everybody was in a hurry, and it broke and cut his foot real bad. Okay. And one of the old ladies that was with us, they had a bunch of spider webs up in the attic. And she pulled a bunch of spider webs in the attic and wrapped around that foot, and it stopped the bleeding.
I have never heard of that.
Oh, it works.
That's amazing. So luckily somebody knew what to do and he didn't have to suffer.
And the next morning, they had people from Grand Chenier that had saved some boats, and they came over, seeing what had happened on the back ridge there. Yes. And they took the boy that got his foot cut and his mother to Grand Chenier, where they called a helicopter and brought him to the hospital.
Boy, you talk about people stepped up, people reached out. They didn't just take care of themselves, they reached out to neighbors, and that says a lot about the people from Cameron Parish. And
then the day after the storm, they started picking up people around 10 o'clock with helicopters.
Gotcha. How were you?
We ended up coming out on an army duck.
Okay.
There was a state trooper. He was a trooper in our parish for a while.
Okay.
And he was on this army duck showing them where to go.
Nice.
And we got on that duck probably about 4 o'clock in the next afternoon, and we took off, and we went across the Big Burns.
Kind of on the north side of Cameron Parish?
Of Little Chenier, yes.
Okay.
Yes. We get to the Anacostia Canal, we run out of gas.
The duck ran out of gas?
The duck ran, but they weren't letting the tugboats go through the bridge, so they had a long line of tugboats. Yeah. So one tugboat broke loose and picked us up and brought us to the Gippstown Bridge. Nice. And we got an army truck at the Gippstown Bridge, and we came here to the old rodeo arena.
Absolutely. Now, when you ran out of gas at the bridge and the tugboat came over, how many were in the duck with you?
We were probably still 12, 14, I guess.
Okay.
Because the helicopter had picked some of the old people out.
Got you. And you were still with the people from your house, or had you met your dad yet?
No, I didn't see my dad for quite a few weeks.
Really?
Yes,
oh,
sir.
My goodness. And your mom or brother either?
My brother and them came back from from Houston, but I didn't see none of the family.
Gotcha.
I had a friend that his wife was from DeQuincy, and they had just got married.
Okay.
And they brought me over there with them. An older woman by the name of Miss Johnson. I don't know her first name.
Okay.
And I stayed there with them for about a month, I guess.
After Audrey?
After Audrey. The friend was married to her daughter.
Gotcha.
And Martin Theriot.
Okay, I've heard that name.
Yeah.
So you were in DeQuincy for about a month?
About a month and a half.
When did you get back?
Uncle Vanya and Aunt Effie wanted to go home. See, there was no bridges left. They had to build the bridges. So whenever the bridges were built, they wanted to go clean up around the house.
Yeah.
So they called me. Well, they didn't call me. They met me. I don't remember where. Every day we'd come in from DeQuincy. We'd come and get the cattle from Giftstown. They had just bought the land for the airport.
Okay.
And we'd drive the cattle from Giftstown to the airport every day.
Why the airport?
Well, that had all that. See, they hadn't built the airport. They had bought that.
They had that whole big pasture.
A big pasture, yes, sir.
My goodness.
And they had a lot of cattle there.
Yes.
And the old people met me there one day and told me they were ready to go home. So they came to DeQuincy and picked me up.
Nice.
I had those people were very good to us. They give us clothes and whatever. Yes. Very good to us.
And that's the Johnsons. That's Mrs.
Yes, sir.
Johnson.
Yes, sir.
From
her and her family. Yes.
Okay.
Some of the girls were married to the Yelverton.
The Yelvertons?
Yes, sir. And
Judge Yelverton?
well, no, not from here.
Okay.
They were from DeQuincy. One of the son-in-laws had the Ford place in DeQuincy at that time.
Okay.
We were lucky.
Oh, very much. Yes, that was.
We didn't get wet.
Going up into the attic was then the cut on the ankle and stuff. So, after going through all of this and this experience with Audrey and with all the hurricanes, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Get out.
Get out. Evacuate. Whenever it's time, get out.
Whenever Katrina hit New Orleans, well, I had a son that was, I don't remember how old he was, but anyway, he was living in the same yard with us. He hadn't married. And we were watching Katrina on the news, and he was sitting there next to me. I said, James, I said, you see what the people are going through? I said, that's what we went through for Audrey. And I said, if they ever say evacuate, you get yourself out of here. Get your family out. And it just so happened, we had a camp at Toledo Bend at that time. And that's where we went for Rita. And I had a friend that had an airboat. Lonnie Harper, you may know him. He used to teach here, engineer.
His name is familiar.
He had classes. He'd teach classes here.
Okay, engineering is a great program here. They are top notch.
And he had a camp right across the street from us, and he had airboats, so we went down to Grand Chenier after Rita to see what was left. And James was with us. We started passing by them houses that had floated in the big burns, and I said, you see there, James?
Yes. So he saw Katrina, and then he saw Rita. Does he evacuate now?
Well, he's living next to me in Homewood.
There we go. Okay. Hopefully he learned the lesson.
Well, he moved away. He moved away before we moved.
Okay.
But we had 4 grandkids playing ball here.
Okay.
And every night they'd have a ball game, 4 nights a week.
Yes.
And one night we were going home on top of the Intercoastal Canal Bridge. Okay. My wife said, either we build in Homewood or we quit going to games.
Wow.
So I said,
There
well,
we go.
get you an architect and get you.
Nice.
So we built a home.
That was
and-
the moment. It was,
and we built a
being
home.
with the
And it was
grandkids.
hard to leave now, I want to tell you.
Understand. Yeah, yeah,
But now, after this last two, I'm satisfied.
yeah. It was a good
Oh,
decision.
before my old heart was down there.
Yeah.
But
that's-
that was, I hope never to see that again.
Yes, let's hope and pray.
And I'll still tell you this, Mr. McNeely, there's still some people that I'm sure they never found, and they never missed and never found. Because at that time we had all industry, a lot of strangers down there,
That's true.
and I would say there's still people that,
You're not alone. There's many people that I've spoken to said that the numbers will never be clear because it was just so devastating.
so sad to see them poor people, their body floating, you know.
Yes. Yes. Well, is there anything else that about the story and but
Now, the old house that Uncle Vanya and Aunt Effie lived in, part of it was pegged.
what is pegged?
Well, whenever they built it, they used pegs to, there was no nails.
Okay.
They,
So they put it together with
with wooden peg, they'd bore a hole in there, and
it
it,
was wooden.
yes, sir. Part of it was a peg, part of it was old iron square head nails, and then part of it was galvanized. They kept adding on.
Right. As time went on.
Last was galvanized nails,
Okay.
and the studs in the house were 4x4 rough cypress.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm telling you, I didn't know that was there until Rita hit.
Okay.
Whenever Rita hit, well, the old house had stayed for Audrey, and whenever Rita hit, well, they took some stuff off where I could see and that's what they had.
4x4 cypress. That's some good wood. That's some strong.
And I messed up and let them demolish it. I could have, somebody would have gladly tore that down for the lumber.
Yeah. Well, you can't. I mean, that was just a traumatic experience that I understand. But that's amazing. I didn't realize that house had that many.
And that old house there is an old house too.
Okay, the one with the picture in the paper. I hope to.
They were all old houses.
Okay.
On Senior Party, they had 5 houses,
Really?
and that was all old houses.
Had been there since.
Had been there for years.
Yes. Okay.
Like the Uncle Vanya, the people I lived with, that was his daddy's house.
But it
So
was his dad
who built the home?
built it, and so
Yeah.
it was probably
Yeah.
from the 1800s.
Yeah.
That,
Like I said before, I hope I don't ever go back through another one.
Mr. Gerald, thank you so much for sharing this. This is hopefully going to be available for generations to come, and your family, as well as anybody, will understand the power and the ingenuity and the resilience of the people from Cameron Parish. Okay. Well, thank you again, Gerald, so much for this, and we deeply appreciate it.